TaxAct knows filing your small business taxes can be a nightmare, like the kind where you're being chased by a giant W-2 form and you're running and running, but you can never reach the submit button. Or something like that. So, TaxAct offers Expert Assist with live tax experts to make filing taxes less scary. Now, you can just have pleasant dreams about being chased by other giant, non-threatening paperwork. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
Welcome to Ballot Battleground Nevada. I'm your host, Ben Margiott, a reporter at KRNV News 4 in Reno. I'm passionate about making politics in this critical battleground state more digestible to the average voter and pushing past the talking points to press politicians for answers. On this show, we take deep dives into the people, ideas, and debates shaping Silver State politics. The promise of affordable, high-speed internet in an area of rural Nevada that desperately needs connectivity. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? The people of the town of Lovelock in Pershing County were thrilled to hear that Uprise Fiber would get more than $27 million to bring high-speed internet to their community of less than 2,000 people. Nearly 3 years later, there is no fiber internet and no progress whatsoever. And $9 million the state put toward the project is gone. It's a scandal that may not have been uncovered and certainly would not have received the amount of attention it now has if not for the dogged efforts of our investigative reporter and main anchor at News 4, Joe Hart. He has been relentless in the pursuit of the truth in the Uprise Fiber scandal, a story that we haven't covered on this show yet because it hasn't really touched politics. But in the last few weeks, this story has become quite political, so we thought it would be the perfect time to talk about it on this show. Joe has done dozens of updates on his Facebook page and on News 4, but sometimes it can be hard to keep track because there have been so many twists and turns. So this week, we will walk you through the Uprise Fiber scandal from the start to today. How did this happen? Who's to blame? Are the people responsible being held accountable? And how can the state put in safeguards to prevent this from happening again? We got into all of it with my coworker, friend, and mentor, Joe Hart. This episode's guest needs no introduction. You know him, you love him. If you watch News 4, if you've lived in Northern Nevada for some time, Joe Hart, main anchor, investigative reporter at News 4 since 1997.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Joe, thank you so much for being here.
Ben, thanks for having me on. It's great. I'm so proud of what you do for the station with all this, and I'm excited that I have this story that fits into what you want to talk about, so it's good.
Absolutely. Before we really get into the meat of something, I have a thank you gift. For appearing on the podcast this week, a special Uprise Fiber
there you go. Some
water
swag,
bottle
for Uprise.
Courtesy.
That's good. That's going to be a collector's item at some point.
Seriously, so you can have it. I actually have not used it, which is honestly a good segue because as we will get into today, Uprise Fiber has not completed their end of the bargain, but we'll get into that in just a moment.
All right.
Let's start with the personal story for me because it was actually literally my first day back from having my son on paternity. My wife had my son, obviously, but my first day back from paternity leave.
I remember that.
And I'm, all out of sorts. What story do I cover today? There's a big announcement. The USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack is in town to announce, major high-speed internet project coming to Lovelock. The federal government was pledging $400+ million in total to projects like this all over the country. Nevada's getting this project, high-speed fiber internet in Lovelock. And at that point, it was just the announcement. I covered that literally my first day back after paternity leave. Never in a million years thought that we would be here in these chairs today having
I know.
the
They were so
conversation.
excited about it at the time, the USDA, the federal government. This was a big deal. And Lovelock is so underserved, which is why the federal government targeted them and said, hey, we're going to give them the high-speed internet. But you're right. This was a huge deal. There was a ton of excitement. And the agriculture secretary comes to Reno to announce it, kick it off. That's a big deal.
Absolutely. And you've been out, before we get into kind of the scandal, we're calling it, you've been out to Lovelock, I think, once or twice as you've reported this story. I mean, what does this project or did this project mean to the people there, an underserved, unserved community when it comes to high-speed internet? And obviously, during COVID, we learned how critical that is.
Yeah, I read a statistic that said 90% of residents in Lovelock do not have adequate internet service.
Wow.
And so that's just phenomenal this day and age when you think about a service that we all take for granted pretty much. But we went out there, went to the library and talked to some folks there. And, it takes about 5 minutes just to get on the internet, to log on,
Wow.
and these days, and so you can rule out things like video gaming and telemedicine, those kind of things, streaming, and the gentleman who runs the library out there in Lovelock really put it well, and he said when you're already kind of closed in just geographically, because Lovelock is so far from Reno in a lot of places. The lack of broadband, the lack of internet service connectivity just locks you in even more, which is sad. That they feel so boxed in. And this was their hope. This was going to connect them to the outside world, if you want to put it that way. And so I think there's a lot of optimism and excitement, and it's disappointing for them for sure that it hasn't happened.
Absolutely. So let's fast forward a little bit to when we first started to hear that there might be something amiss with this project. So the initial announcement was in July of 2022. And I'll just go over some of the nuts and bolts. Uprise Fiber, this Reno-based company, was going to get $27 million to connect about 5,000 people in the Lovelock, Pershing County area. And it was going to be pretty affordable, a gigabit connection, $50 a month, a slower connection a little bit, $30 a month.
Which is huge for those folks out there who, it's a lower income area.
Absolutely. Did any work on this project begin at all?
A fraction of the work got done. I think if I have the numbers right, it was 36 miles. This project was, and they got about 2 miles done of the trenching work. So this company, Uprise, got the $9 million. The deal was that, the story you covered, the USDA came out. We're going to pledge $27 million for this project, but somebody's got to put up a percentage of matching funds. So the federal government didn't want to be the only one putting in money. So Nevada said, we'll do that. And they handed over $9.1 million to this company called Uprise. Now, we can talk more about it, but they paid that money up front, which is now the big question. They just handed it over. We have the documents to show it. It seems like a strange way of doing business for the state of Nevada, but they gave $9 million up front to this company. And then Uprise hired another company to do the trenching work, basically. And then that company is doing its work. It's a small local company, and they didn't get paid. So they're trenching. They bought all this equipment, and they said, whoa, wait a minute, what's going on here? And they ended up filing a lawsuit, this Nevada, they're called, against NDOT and Uprise for non-payment.
And that was the first sign, really, that something wasn't going right here. Let's be real specific about the timeline for us. In which administration, not presidential, but gubernatorial, was this originated? It started under Steve Sisolak's administration, right? But it kind of carried over into Lombardo. How did that work?
The contract was basically, and Governor Lombardo's staff has been clear to point this out. The contract was put together in 2022, before Governor Lombardo was elected. So in fairness, he serves as chair of the NDOT board, and the board approved the contract in February of 2023. So he was in office then. He was brand new, but he was in office in 2023 when he approved it. So did he put together the deal? Was he overseeing that? No, that would have been under Governor Sisolak. But Governor Lombardo signed on the dotted line, if you want to put it that way, and approved it as chair of the NDOT board.
And the chair of, or the NDOT board in total includes him, the lieutenant governor, the controller, right, Andy Matthews.
Correct.
And then we 4 regional directors for NDOT.
Yeah, exactly.
They all sign off on this in early 2023, and it's later in that year, right, that we get the first lawsuit of the non-payment to the contractor. But really, I don't think we even covered that initial lawsuit. It wasn't until, was it later last year, 2024, that things really started to go south?
Well, that November of 2023 is such an important date. That is when the lawsuit was filed, and that was Nevada, this small company that, they were supposed to make millions off this project and got nothing. And they're like, whoa, wait a minute. So they filed this lawsuit against NDOT and Uprise. And what's significant about that is the Attorney General's office represents NDOT in that lawsuit. So they defend NDOT. So as of November of 2023, NDOT knew about, the Attorney General knew all about the problems going on with this project.
So they've been aware for some time.
But it was quiet. It was quiet for a long time. The lawsuit started to move forward, but publicly, nothing was happening. There was no accountability. There was no one speaking up. And that's why the folks involved with the lawsuit got in touch with us. Enough is enough. Let's get this out in the public.
Yeah, that was my next question, which was obviously not going to ask you to reveal any sources, but to the extent you can, tell us how you initially got tipped off, when, and what you did about it.
Yeah, it's a source. It's not super secretive though. They were trying to be vocal, and I think they felt like nobody was listening, and so they did reach out. One of the Nevada people reached out to me and said, "Hey, this is what's going on. You know, this project has gone nowhere. The $9.1 million. You know, we didn't get paid, and what caught my attention was the state paid. This is taxpayer money. The state paid out $9.1 million. And at that point, if you remember our stories, we were saying it was unaccounted for.
Sure.
Because nobody was exactly clear, but it's a little bit too early to say it was missing. Now, clearly it's missing. Nobody knows where that money is. But it was unaccounted for, taxpayer dollars. And that's when I just really started to dig in and ask more questions and really realize this is a big deal, you know, to have a deal like this go south like that.
Want a website with unmatched power, speed, and control? Try Bluehost Cloud, the new web hosting plan from Bluehost, built for WordPress creators by WordPress experts. With 100% uptime, incredible load times, and 24/7 WordPress priority support, your sites will be lightning fast with global reach. And with Bluehost Cloud, your sites can handle surges in traffic no matter how big. Plus, you automatically get daily backups and world-class security. Get started now at Bluehost.com.
Explain for our listeners and audience, I mean, the amount of calls, emails, fact-checking, research, digging through, you know, financial documents, because I think people sometimes, you know, see a minute 30 or 2 minutes on the news at night and think and not understand the full amount of work that goes. I mean, you were working on this for several months probably before the first full story aired, I think, at the start of this year, right?
A lot of conversations with the people involved, with the Nevada people. And I do have to say, so that I don't take too much credit, they had so many of the documents through subpoenas, through the lawsuit that they provided. And we verified through our attorneys here at Sinclair that to make sure they were all official and on the up and up and that we could report that and use that. But they had this paperwork that was like gold for an investigative story. So it wasn't even like I had to go digging for that. They had the bank record that showed the state paid the $9.1 million. They have bank records that show Stephen Cromer, the owner of Uprise, his name is on every withdrawal from that account for $200,000, $300,000, $400,000. There was a 3-month period where I think millions was taken out at one time. So that paperwork, that documentation, those banking records that wouldn't be available ordinarily, they got them through subpoena. That told the story in so many ways.
And so in total, of the roughly $11 million that the state kind of allocates to this project, they give the $9 million, you know, write the check essentially to Uprise, and all of the $9.1 million was at some point in total withdrawn from Uprise's account to Stephen Cromer. I want to be very specific about this. His you know, personal individual account? That's
my understanding. It just, like I said, it was $200,000, $250,000, $300,000 at a time, these withdrawals. And my understanding is this account was set up, and I'm not an expert, but the USDA was involved. You weren't supposed to be taking out money unless it was approved for the project is what the oversight and the language I've seen. So to just be withdrawing this money with no approvals from the USDA or anybody else, it wasn't supposed to happen that way. So that account was drained. The last statement that I saw was November at the end of last year, and had $10,000 left out of that $9.1 million.
Wow, that's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah,
still
it was basically all gone, and at that point, that's when we went looking for Mr. Cromer.
That's what I was gonna say. So a great TV story is you got to find the person at the center of this. Walk me through your efforts to try and get a hold of him. I assume by phone, email, and then ultimately going down to the office not far from our station here in Reno to try and track this guy down.
Yeah, and at this point, Ben, it was still unaccounted for. Nobody really, wasn't exactly clear what had happened. But I'd seen these bank records and the money had been withdrawn, and so I did call him, a few times. He didn't call back. So then we went to his office over on Matley Lane and knocked on the door. He wasn't available, not in the office, and we went by again. Maybe it was a week or so later. Just wanted to give ample effort for him to tell his side of the story and tell us what's going on here, and also show viewers that we're making the effort, taking the steps to explore these avenues. Not there the second time, and I think we went by on a Friday, and that following Monday, his family announced that he'd resigned from their investment company.
Wow.
Sent out an internal email to that effect that I was able to see, and so they were clearly disassociating from him at that point. And it was interesting. It was the next workday after we went by the office. So whether it had anything to do with it, I'm not sure, but that's the timing.
Interesting timing for sure. And so he, even to this day now in mid-March, you've heard nothing from him whatsoever, right?
No, not a word, not a word. I think he's still in town, is what I'm told. But we made pretty good effort to go see him, go find him, go talk to him, and then it was clear that wasn't going to happen. And then as we'll talk about, the story kind of evolved from him to more who's in charge and who's accountable and who's going to do anything about this.
Absolutely. That's the second piece of the story, and that's where it really starts to touch into the politics realm.
Yeah.
But just level set for us, as things stand today, the money is gone. Stephen Cromer is no longer with Uprise Fiber, with the family investment company, right? And we don't know.
Yeah, the family investment company, this is getting technical, but that's Cromer Investments.
Okay.
And that's who they say he resigned from.
Yeah.
He still has Uprise Fiber. He still has that company. It still exists. But he resigned from the family's investment company.
Gotcha. And then 2 separate investigations have been opened by which entities?
So that's interesting. Again, nobody was doing anything, Ben. Nobody was getting in charge that we knew of.
Yeah.
And so finally, Senator Ira Hansen, I was talking to him. He represents Pershing County, as you know.
Yep.
And he got, the more he learned about this, he got pretty worked up about it. And he actually filed a complaint with the sheriff's office. He reached out to the Washoe County Sheriff's Office because when I talked to him, they said, well, we need a victim. Nobody's really come forward. The taxpayers are the victims here in a way.
Right.
And so Senator Hansen said, I'll be your victim. And so he filed a criminal complaint with the sheriff's office. Sheriff's office confirmed to me, yes, they had a investigation open, but that's all they would say.
And that's Washoe County Sheriff's Office,
Washoe County
because
Sheriff.
the business is here.
Yes,
right,
exactly. Okay. And then we know from sources that the Attorney General's office and the FBI are involved. So I think all those agencies are cooperating, is my sense. The Attorney General's office doesn't comment on any investigations, but they're clearly involved in tracking down what happened to this money.
What's your understanding? Because, the initial lawsuit from KRNV is suing the state and the state of Nevada, and the Attorney General's office is defending NDOT in that first lawsuit.
Yeah.
So explain for our audience, this is kind of convoluted here, but why it is tricky for then the AG to also prosecute this case when it's defending NDOT, right, in a related case?
Yeah, and they're doing it, know, so they I guess would not say it's tricky, but I think a lot of people think it is, and could be a conflict. The Attorney General's office, my understanding, is basically put this contract together, signed the contract. As Senator Hansen put it, they're the state's attorney. So we're relying on them to put together a contract that makes sense and is good for the state. Well, it doesn't seem like it was in this case, because the state there were just some protections lacking in this contract for whatever reason. And so the Attorney General's office, put that contract together, and now they're charged with going and doing the criminal investigation after this deal, went south. So as far as I know, both those things are happening.
Sure.
There are some people who would say that that's a problem and a conflict, and perhaps there should be an outside agency doing the criminal investigation. But my understanding is the AG's office is on the trail and working to get to the bottom of this and figure out where that $9 million ended up.
And so you are going down to the legislature, a couple times over the past few weeks. You talked to Ira Hansen.
Yeah.
He's kind of starting to make some noise about this. But really, from your perspective, it kind of seemed like there weren't enough people in the legislature that were really, for lack of a better word, pissed off about what had happened, right? And it just seemed like he, for a time being, now it's kind of changed now, but for the time being, he was the only one making any noise about it. You try to talk to the chair of one of the committees down there and tell us what happened there.
Sure. Well, I'll tell you what, it was a lesson for me because I don't cover the legislature on a regular basis like you do, but I didn't realize that somebody like Senator Hansen and the minority party does not have the power to call for an investigation or to issue a subpoena. That's the majority party that has the power to do that. So so I'm interviewing him. He is vocal. He's upset. He's concerned, but clearly quickly realized he doesn't have any power in this, Senator Hansen, which is frustrating.
Democrats control both the Assembly and the Senate. They have for several cycles now, so
they're in charge. Yeah, they're in charge for any investigation. So and Senator Hansen is on the judiciary, but he's not in the majority party. So that led me to Senator Melanie Scheibel. She's the chair of that committee, and so she could call an investigation. She could issue subpoenas. So we had to go, and I'll just tell you the process if you're interested.
Sure.
Reached out by email to Senator Scheibel and to the representative, the person who handles the Senate Democrats group, and no response. I said, I want to interview Senator Scheibel about this story. No response. So gave him ample chance to respond. We went down to the legislature and met Senator Scheibel, and she was very accommodating. She was great and said she was willing to answer questions. But her take was no investigation is going to happen at the legislative level. And they're not calling anybody in. She sees no signs of wrongdoing on the state's part, and she doesn't want to interfere with the criminal investigation, she said. So those answers surprised me a bit, but that was her stance.
And then since that has happened now, well, and I guess we have to talk about the moment that has garnered a lot of attention here, which is,
it was interesting.
The interview is cut off by Greg Lademan. He's a staffer for the Senate Democrats. Have you experienced something like that?
No, and like I said, I want to be so clear. Senator Scheibel took time, sort of impromptu down there out of their Senate meetings to do the interview on camera and answer questions, and those were her answers. And as I asked whether there should be a public hearing, to address this, the person you mentioned, Greg, I guess Lademan, just stepped in out of nowhere and grabbed her and ushered her away, and he said, "We're done," to her and me, I guess, both of us. But that was his announcement. So I don't know if that's his role. It surprised me. I would think a state senator could decide that on her own myself. But she was, I could tell she wasn't expecting that to happen. So he ushered her away, and I just said again, no public hearing for this, and they were gone. Didn't explain why. Didn't say it was a time constraint. He just walked her away. So that was surprising. And there was nothing contentious about the interview at that point. I was just asking questions, but for whatever reason, he decided to end it.
Interesting. Yeah. And so as it stands now, it does not appear as if the legislature is going to subpoena people, launch their own investigation, and they're going to let the Washington County Sheriff's Office and presumably it seems the Attorney General's office continue with their investigations, and we'll see where that takes us. One piece that also, touches politics here is we heard from Aaron Ford, who released a lengthy statement. He was kind of blasting Ira Hansen's role in this. Remind us what he said, something to the effect of Ira Hansen doesn't know all the facts here.
Well, I interviewed Senator Hansen first of all that aired in our story, and his point was the Attorney General has to answer some questions. The Attorney General put this deal together, this contract. Let's address this, and so he said the Attorney General's office dropped the ball on this Uprise deal. So he didn't mince words, put it that way. So that was in the story. I did reach out to the Attorney General's office. I told them what he had said, and they gave me a statement. We put part of it in the story, and the gist of what the Attorney General said was that Senator Hansen doesn't know what he's talking about, doesn't have all the facts. So that's what was in the story. And then there was a lengthy statement we added after, which they're not going to talk about the specifics of the case, but the essence of it was that the senator who's criticizing the AG's office isn't informed, doesn't have all the facts. So that's where that's at, and they're entitled to each weigh in that way.
Sure, yeah.
Can you feel it in the air? That sudden shift of mood? It's the perfect time to shed the winter blues and experience the revitalizing qualities of driving a Lincoln. It starts with the Lincoln Spring Sales Event. So step outside and visit your local Lincoln retailer or Lincoln.com for some seriously mood-enhancing offers on current and past Lincoln models. Your transformation awaits. Learn more at Lincoln.com.
This might be a little bit wonky, but we'll back up to when the contract was originally signed off on and the money was approved and sent. I mean, is it your understanding that it's like standard practice for the state to give $9 million to a project before any work is done? I mean,
Ben, I don't think that's standard practice anywhere.
Okay.
On Mars or Nevada or anywhere.
Sure.
I mean, everybody you talk to
Yeah.
is like scratching their head going, why did we hand over $9 million before? I mean, you wouldn't do it to a painter at your house.
Sure.
You know, nobody does it. And so that's the big mystery about this.
Normally with these state contracts, is it half the money, or is it, they give half the money when a piece of it is done? Or?
Yeah, I think they were just talking about it at a committee hearing I was watching this morning. And I think typically there's a term for it. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but you do some of the work and then you're paid incrementally.
Okay.
Basically.
Yeah.
And that would be more typical. And they're also you just have to protect yourself, whether it's you hiring somebody or the state with the taxpayer dollars. There have to be some protections. And the biggest mystery perhaps of all here is why there weren't any protections in this contract or enough protections for that. But to hand over $9 million to a sort of a little known company, it seems like, to say, go to town and let us know when you're done. No.
Yeah. Did Uprise Fiber, you mentioned little known company, did they have a track record of doing a handful of successful projects in other parts of the state?
From what I know, they've been around. They do a lot of internet projects for different apartment complexes and that kind of a thing. But I'm not sure that the state had any record with them working. So I think what happened here in a nutshell,
I was going to say, how did
is
this happen?
the federal government came and when you were talking about your story, and they said we're going to do $27 million. We're going to deliver fiber optic to Lovelock, but we need the matching funds. And I don't mean to gloss over things, but I think the state just jumped at it because they didn't want to lose that $27 million, so they threw the $9 million out there. That's the only thing that makes sense. But for some reason they did. So I guess my point is I think there was some urgency to not lose that $27 million, not lose the federal share.
Yeah.
And so perhaps, I don't know for sure because nobody knows, perhaps that led to the state being a little too anxious to get this project started and to put that money in.
Interesting. What can be done to prevent this from possibly ever happening in the future, or is this contract so unusual in the way that it was done that
I think some of the fiber optic stuff is unusual. I've kind of gathered through looking into this, but that question has to be answered, Ben, because we can't afford to have this happen again.
Yeah.
And lawmakers, there was a committee hearing going on this week, and they're asking some questions about how this was approved. And so I think more people are asking questions. But that has to be addressed. And to me, as a reporter and taxpayer, if you want to put it that way, that's why I was going to the legislature to say, who's asking questions here? To me, I think most rational people and common sense would tell you that lawmakers would want to bring people in and ask them how this was done. Now, the catch is, and some will say that it's political, any investigation like that would probably involve the Attorney General because they did the contract.
Yeah.
And Nevada's Attorney General is a Democrat, and the Democrats run the legislature. So
and he's running for governor.
And he's running for governor.
Joe running for re-election.
Yeah.
And,
so there are people that view this and say, well, it's political. In fact, Senator Hansen, when I talked about an investigation, he said that's never going to happen. Just like that, the Democrats aren't going to call in Democrats to question them about this project, is what many people think.
Interesting. Let's go back to Lovelock. What have you heard from them since? I assume just immense disappointment because nothing's changed when it comes to them getting the fiber optic internet they were promised.
Yeah, I think they just feel let down. They did have hopes that this was going to materialize, and it was a promise. So and now they're still dealing with this lack of connectivity and of a basic service, which is I think we all view it that way. So they're frustrated. I did talk to some of the economic development folks out there in the beginning, and they were super helpful. But then along the way, they said they weren't allowed to talk anymore. I think somebody got to them and made them quiet down. But they were wonderfully helpful in the beginning, and I think everybody just had these hopes. And I think one question now, Ben, is what are the chances this is ever going to happen? And now you got DOGE diving in at the federal level. To me, I wonder how likely it is that $27 million is still sitting around
for
this project in Lovelock.
Yeah.
It just seems unlikely to me. With all the problems. So will this project ever happen? Will it get off the ground at any point? This lawsuit's going to take probably years to resolve, as they do. So it doesn't look good that way. I wouldn't think.
Sure. I don't want to make you predict or projected to the future, but I mean, obviously, as the sheriff's office and the AG's office seem to be investigating, I mean, the next step potentially at some point in the future is someone going to be arrested for their role in this or charged? I mean,
no, you're right. That's the focal point now is the criminal investigation, and unfortunately, we don't really have any inside look at that. I can tell you that they told me, sources told me that many people have been interviewed and search warrants have been issued. So this is a pretty serious law enforcement investigation. But the pace of it and how long it takes and will it end in an arrest, who's to say? But that's everybody. The lawmakers seem content to stand back, let the criminal investigation go. But so that is, I think we kind of have to just watch and wait. Yeah. The interesting thing is we were talking about just beforehand is this started out with we were going and trying to track down Stephen Cromer, right? The $9 million. This guy took, had the money, and withdrew the money. So all the focus was on him. It's evolved, like as our story, into now government accountability and who's in charge and who's going to do anything about this. So there's a criminal investigation, obviously, to get to the bottom of it. But our lawmakers going to address this and find out why these state agencies did what they did. So it's and it seems like no, which just raises even more questions. But it's evolved from, where'd the money go to who's doing anything about this. Yeah.
Well, Joe, on behalf of Nevadans, taxpayers, the people of Lovelock, thank you. Just because story has taken so many twists and turns, it has taken so much work behind the scenes that people might not realize. And as I said in the intro to this podcast, the story may have been uncovered eventually, but it certainly would not have received the amount of attention that it has if not for your dogged, relentless pursuit of the truth in this case. So thank you. And what makes you keep going at it? I think I said before we started taping, you're like a dog on a scent. Like you pick up a little scent and you're just gone.
That's a good question, Ben. I love doing it, first of all. I love the curious nature of it, getting questions answered. And for me, being at it this long, usually when somebody just tells you no comment, or I'm not going to answer, and I know you're the same way. That's a red flag. That tells you something's going on. That's probably worth pursuing. But I think in this case, it really was kind of the perfect sort of news story in a way, in that there's a significant amount of taxpayer dollars here. We're not talking about $100. It's $9 million. And just so many questions about what happened to it, and like we've been talking about, who's going to do anything about it? Who is going to hold people accountable? And it's a real study in the checks and balances of Nevada's government, I think, and some that are lacking because of the current nature of the setup with who's in power, I think, perhaps, or because just the people that call the shots aren't interested in looking into it. But there's a checks and balances. That's the way the government's set up, and somebody should be asking these state agencies questions about how this happened. And when they're not, that's not ideal, I think, for the taxpayers.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that something good comes out of this, which is some safeguards to prevent this from happening again in the future. And hopefully somewhere down the line, again, bringing it back to the people of Lovelock, that they get this connectivity that's so crucial in this day and age. Joe Hart, thank you so much. I know you have a lot of work to get back to for our newscast and continue to dig on the story, so we will let you get back to it. And hopefully when this story is all settled, you can go out on the boat and not think about Uprise Fiber and go play a couple rounds of golf. It does take
up a lot of my mind and time these days. But like I said, I love doing it. And you know what, Ben? This is what our station's committed to. As you know, this is what our company is committed to, is holding those in charge accountable. And sometimes it can sound like a cliche, but it's not. It's very real. And that's what I love about the job that we do and the chance that we have to do that. In a respectful way, when it's done right, we can serve our viewers and serve the public so well by holding people accountable and asking these questions that are still unanswered in this case, but we'll keep asking them. And it just, I'm proud to have the role that we have.
Yeah. And if you want to learn more and read and watch all of Joe's stories, if you have not followed them closely already, we're going to put the links to all of his stories, probably 5 or 6 now, in the show notes. So go read more, learn more about this project, and of course, keep you updated as we hopefully get an update at some point in the future. Yeah. Joe, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on, Ben. It's an honor. I appreciate it. And hopefully we'll get some answers about this story eventually.
A special thanks to Joe Hart for making time to chat with me on the podcast this week. And do check out the show notes for all of his coverage on the Uprise Fiber saga. If you made it to the end of this episode, I really appreciate it. If you have guest ideas, episode ideas, questions, comments, compliments, concerns, shoot me an email. I want to hear from you. My email is bjmargiott, Margiott, @sbgtv.com, and just put Ballot Battleground Nevada in the subject line. And if you have a minute, we always appreciate if you leave a rating and a review. That helps the podcast show up higher in searches so more people can discover the show. Thanks for listening.